Hello and welcome back to Serious About Rugby League's podcast. Me and Dan are back to give you all the latest in Rugby League, so let's get right back into it. Okay, so unlike our usual starts, we normally go straight into the Super League, don't we? And we were having a conversation about this, and I think it's important that we highlight the Championship first this week, because there has been some exceptional rugby played in the Championship. So we're going to look at some of the Championship teams, how they're getting on, what they're doing, how they're playing, etc. And the two teams we're going to look at, one that is overly performing in my opinion, and one that is completely and utterly underperforming to an extreme measure. So let's look at the underperforming team first, and that's Lee Centurions. I think everybody's thinking the same thing. I know you're thinking the same thing. What do you make of them so far this season?
I think when we first spoke with Tipton, didn't we, to compete with, well, we said Toronto and Lee, we outlined them as and London as well, we outlined them as a three to be really challenging. It's been really poor, hasn't it? I know they've had a couple of tough fixtures. They've had Toulouse and they've had Toronto, but the Batley game they obviously won with ease. But Toulouse at Barrow, credit to Barrow, was a good performance. But the performance just hasn't been there, has it? And we've seen that with the sacking of the coach. And something's really got to change, because at the moment it looks like they need to get out of a rut.
Yeah, I still think the sacking was a bit harsh on my point. I feel like Neil Dukes did a really good job at Lee, and he got them back into the Super League, and obviously it didn't go their way in the Super League, but that was because of the system that we've got in place. I mean, if you have straight relegation like we used to have, they stay in the Super League, and it's a different season for them. But as you said, the Barrow game was incredible. Like, fair play to the Barrow, they were absolutely outstanding on the day. Like, but it's not what you want to be seeing from a League team that are trying to push to get back in that Super League competition. At the minute, they don't even look like they're going to make the top four, never mind the Super League. So I don't think Dewsbury can hold on for as long as they may hope to hold on. I don't think the squad's strong enough in depth, but to push for that final fourth spot with still the likes of Halifax, Dewsbury, who will be there or thereabouts, and then even the likes of Barrow, if they keep performing to the level they're performing, it's going to be a tough ask for Lee.
Well, the thing for Lee that's got me is obviously they've thrown 2 games late on in the last 2 games. 12 men of Toulouse, they threw it right at the end, and even Featherstone at the weekend, there's a couple, when no one else played, a couple of late tries has really screwed them over in that sense. So there's no momentum really about Lee at the moment, and it's something that definitely has to change.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is completely different to the other side we're going to talk about.
Yeah, I agree. Like London, if you look on the complete opposite side, people expected London to do well, but they have gone out of the blocks. They destroyed Toronto. They walked over Featherstone. Like, these are the teams that are supposed to be competing with them for the title, and they're just destroying them. They're walking by them it's easy. Right now, if you put London against a Salford team or against a Catalans team, you'd expect London to win by 30 points.
Yeah, well, they've dispatched, haven't they, of those 2 fiercest competitors, the people you'd expect to be their 2 biggest rivals. They did a job at Dewsbury, perhaps when the weather wasn't on there in anyone's favour, so that was an important win, and obviously beat Barrow with ease. But they're racking up plenty of points, which is the interesting thing. Attacking rugby, they've shelled a couple against the bigger 2 teams, but it's not been anything extraordinary. They've defended pretty well, and I think a lot of it's coming through Jared Samet in that attacking sense. He's scored 5 tries, almost 30 goals already, and we're just 4 games in.
It's true, and I think the biggest test for me that I can see is going to be going to Toronto for London, and with the way they're playing, that's not going to be a test at all. They're just going to walk that off like everything else.
Yeah, I still think it's too early to read into the table. You have to look at halfway, really, especially with Toronto playing all their away games. You can't look into that too much till they've got back on Canadian soil, and there'll be some bankers there, won't there? I
mean, quickly we'll look at a couple of games from the Championship this weekend, and this weekend, again, there's a couple of key fixtures. I posted on Twitter about this, and I was like, there's games that are on the TV in Super League that just don't seem to appeal to me. Catalans and Hull KR, for example. And I know that comes through the French broadcaster. But there's 2 games that we're going to highlight here, for me, are much bigger games than the ones that are on Sky this weekend.
Yeah, so the first one we've mentioned Lee already. They're going to Halifax. 2 sides who've perhaps Lee have underperformed, and Halifax haven't been all that convincing. They were less than convincing against Rochdale, but they did grind out a win, which is important in the context of the early season. Defence is good, attacking flair and intent not so much. So that's something that Richard Marshall and his men need to work on. I know they are working on it, but by that same vein, Lee are on the ropes, and it's a real chance for Halifax to seize an opportunity to get one over on one of the teams that would have been expected to be above them in this early season and at the end of the season. And if Halifax can pull that off against Leigh, then it makes the Centurions' job much more difficult.
Yeah, I feel like Halifax have really performed well and not really got they've not really reaped the rewards that they deserve to get out of some results. But Leigh look really uncomfortable at the minute, and if Halifax can get out, make them uncomfortable for the first 20 minutes in their conditions on their pitch, it might be a difficult day for Leigh. So let's move on from the Championship. And although we did say the Championship is, like, for me, the key competition so far, like the way the rugby's being played, the Super League still reigns supreme in terms of the top of the English game. And it is an interesting competition so far. I mean, there's a few things happening that you want to expect to have happened. Two teams that we've not yet focused on fully, we're going to focus on now. And I feel like it's fair enough. It's top and tail. We're going to look at Wakefield Trinity Wildcats and Catalan Dragons. Wakefield, we start on the opposite foot this time, and we start with the team that are undefeated in the league. Wakefield have had some tricky games, and they've come out unscathed.
I think the first time we spoke about Wakefield in that first game, it was one of the ones that last season or in previous seasons they might have lost. But this season they've really been grinding out those sort of fixtures. They've had, it's not been pretty, but it's been effective against Salford, Catalans and Hull KR. Huddersfield at the weekend was there, probably the biggest win of the lot, the most comfortable, 22 points to 4. But those games against the teams towards the bottom of the league, they've come through unscathed. Like you say, they've got the 2 points, and that's really what matters at this point. It's not been pretty, but it has been effective.
I think people look at the Giants so far and think they're a poor side, but I think the Giants' running hasn't been kind to them. They've had St Helens and Wakefield already, the two undefeated teams. They've got 1 win from 4, but they're playing good rugby. I went to watch them train, and when they put it together, they're really, really fast and they're really, really slick. And if they can get that together in a game and it all comes together, they can beat anybody in this league, and it's just whether they can turn up. But I feel like Wakefield did a job to beat them this weekend, and people underestimate the win against Hull KR as well. That's the first game Hull KR had it back in the Super League. They'd have been really up for that game, and they just shut them out. It's a really, really good performance by Wakefield, and I feel like if they take that sort of grit and toughness into the rest of the season, they're going to be a difficult team to stop.
Yeah, well, it's worth saying, I think that's the best ever start to a campaign they've had. They've never won first 4 games since the post-war period, so that really shows the job that Chester's doing there. Maybe the fixtures are falling kindly, but still they've pulled off those wins and they're up there with St Helens.
So, but if you look at the fixture list, and if they would have lost 3 of the 4 or 2 of the 4, you'd be saying, "Oh, Wakefield are going to struggle this year." But they haven't. They've really looked strong, and I think fair play to Chris Chester and to the Wakefield lads are really performing. I think Scott Griggs has been exceptional this season. I know he had his problems at the end of last year that maybe cost him the top 4, but he's been exceptional this year. Jacob Miller, Liam Finn, leading the troops around the field, and it looks fantastic. Let's go down to the opposite side of the table, and we're looking at the Catalan Dragons. It's all going wrong in the south of France. Maybe it's a good thing that Toulouse are doing so well in the Championship, because you can't say anything but relegation for the Catalan Dragons at the minute.
At the moment, it's looking like this French experiment's almost run its course. We thought they'd improved from last season, but they've not picked up at all, have they? We're looking here, they're the lowest scorers in the league, and the joint highest points conceded. So it tells you everything: the worst attack and worst defence.
It's annoying because you look at the squad 1 to 13, and I think there's some lads from that 13 that I would love to have at Wigan. And there's like David Mead, for example. Mickey Maculora, I'd love to have him back at Wigan. I don't know why he left in the first place, but they're not performing for Catalan. It's not coming to. They don't look like a team.
No, they've not gelled, have they?
They're like 13 individuals, and I think if they can gel, as you say, and become a team, they could still be in the top 8. But I don't know what's happening down there.
Yeah, that cohesion takes time, but it's time that they're fast running out of. I know we're only 4 games in, or 5 games in, but Catalan have only played 4 games, but it's time that's fast running out, and they can't afford to lose another 2 or 3 on the bounce, and it looks like an impossible task.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be a tough couple of weeks for Catalan now. They got no wins. They got Hull KR at home at the weekend, which is a massive game for them. And I think if they lose that, you really have to look at them and think, if they're losing at home to a relegation candidate, then they're struggling this season. But back to the teams that maybe aren't struggling as much. Leeds Rhinos have got a big game this weekend against Hull FC. I think both teams haven't performed to the fullest, but have also got victories. So it's not like panic central, but at the same time, they need to start stepping up now. 4 games in, they need to start performing a bit better. I mean, Leeds are only 3 games in because of the postponements, but I think that's going to come down to who's got the determination to go and win that match. And it's at Headingley. It's the first game back at Headingley, which is huge for Leeds. That having that fan base behind them, and you know that when you go to Headingley, it's not going to be an easy game. I honestly can't call it. I think it's going to be a good game. If I was going to go anywhere, I think I'd go Leeds by 4.
It seems to be a trend with a lot of these teams. They've not been convincing. It's really stop-start the earliest part of the season, isn't it, with the World Club Challenge, and then that obviously ruins a couple of fixtures. We've had the snow. They've been playing at Ellen Road as well. They weren't that convincing against KR, but the game they lost against Widnes, I think it's fair to say it was a second-rate side with all those injuries, players missing after the World Club Challenge and whatever else. But Hull FC, by the same page, perhaps, they had a bit of a hangover, didn't they? When they came back, they suffered a loss. Like you say, it's really difficult to call. 2 very evenly matched sides, and it won't be the classic we saw last year in the run-up to the grand final, but it'd be something similar, I think.
Yeah, I think that Leeds have adopted a style over the last couple of years that nobody else in the league has the nerve to try, and that's just to hit the front foot and get the offload. Adam Cuthbertson, Brad Singleton, the masters at it. And it's all about coming out the back from that. I mean, you've got Joel Moon available to you and Callum Watkins coming out the wide. Obviously, the 2 wingers are both exceptional talents. It all depends on getting the offload game working, and that's literally where Leeds' structure comes from. For Hull, they have actually got the system in place where they've got Jamie Shaw coming out the back from Sneed or Kelly, who's just a flair player in general. It looks like an interesting matchup. I mean, on paper, you look at this game and you think this is going to be a cracker, but the way the season started, I think, as you said, it might be a bit more scrappy than you would normally expect this kind of game to be. I think the home advantage will tip it for Leeds, in my opinion. But I think Hull not having Liam Watts could be a massive turning point as well for the fixture. Although Watts isn't maybe the best player in the team, it adds something every week. You got a 3-game ban. I won't lie to you. In my opinion, that's not enough. It was aggressive, it was deliberate, and it was use of the head. I think, in my opinion, you've got to give him 5 games for that. And just to set the point down, I mean, at what point does that become a more harsh punishment? When the player gets injured because of the headbutt, or when somebody's head gets cracked open? I don't understand what the thinking is behind that for the RFL, because he's clearly made a strike for no apparent reason with his head.
Yeah, it's very different to the deck pattern incident that's got him a 5-match ban. Sorry, in that it was an isolated incident and it was completely off the ball. Say what you like about Patton's tackle, whether it was deliberate, whether it was a closed fist, but it was in the field of play. Even though the referee had earlier blown, but it was in the field of play, and it was perhaps more forgivable than Watts, which just seems like a daft error, and it just almost shows the disciplinary panel's kind of flawed logic in what's 3-match and what's 5-match.
My biggest problem with the deck pattern incident is that people say it's a closed fist, but I mean, if you've played rugby league, you know you don't go into a tackle with your hand open, because that just leads you to breaking fingers. When you go around the tackle, you clench your fist so that you can get into the tackle, and then you open your hand to try and get control of the tackle. So deck pattern's doing what every single rugby league player does when they first go into the tackle. Now, the angle he's gone in is unacceptable, and he's hit the jaw. It's 3 to 5 games. I have no problem with that. And if you're going to give him the higher, he's not the most exemplary player in the world. If you're going to give him the higher, fair enough. I'll accept that. What I can't accept is a clear act of intent with the head only getting 3 matches. It just doesn't add up to me. Personally, I don't understand what's going on there.
No, it'll be interesting to see if another incident occurs, or when it does occur throughout the rest of the season, what the action is, and whether the punishment fits the crime.
So quickly, whilst we've got the opportunity to, we're going to mention the cup that took place, not this weekend, the weekend before.
The 24th and 25th.
24th and 25th. There's 3 games that we're going to look at that I think were really outstanding games for the competition. North Wales Crusaders were at home to Keighley Cougars. Keighley have made a really exceptional start to this season and gone under the radar a bit. It's League One. We don't mention it enough on this podcast. We don't mention it at all on this podcast. But Keighley have gone really, really well. The League One competition has gone really, really well. I think Keighley put up a good fight against North Wales. It was 28-24. It looked like a real cracker. Crusaders came back from 24-6 down at half-time, and that's the sort of game that if it was on TV, I'd be more than happy to watch. I can't remember which game was on the TV. I know BBC stream one game for each round. Another big game from the Cup weekend, I thought this was an outstanding result, personally, was Hunslet Club Parkside. They played against Workington at home. They lost 24-16, but this is a team that 3 years ago were in Division 4 of the National Conference League. They've gone back-to-back promotions, I believe. Either back-to-back or back-to-back-to-back, depending on which one it is. One of the coaches being Paul McShay, the Castleford Tigers. They look outstanding. They just look like they can be stopped in the conference. And they've gone to a semi-pro team. Well, not gone to a semi-pro team has come to them. And they put up a massive fight. They lost by 8 points. But what is 8 points? In the difference in money and class, 8 points, that is a real testament to the conference division. And they're only in Division 1. They're not even in the Premiership yet. Like this is a great. They've got a great little setup going on at Hunslet, and I feel like over the next couple of years they could be Premier winners in the conference if they play the cards right.
Yeah, well, that's obviously going to improve with that TV deal we've said, haven't we, with the NCL? That's one thing that's definitely going to improve. More competitive Challenge Cup action and more competitive rugby league further down the ladder is an important thing for it.
I agree, and we always talk about expanding the game, and where could expansion happen? And it's a hot topic in rugby league at the minute. But what we always fail to remember is London is actually an expansion area for us. And we've got the Broncos doing so well in the Championship. And the Scholars played against Whitehaven in the Challenge Cup, and it was a tough game. Like, they really, really took the game to Whitehaven. And they lost 16-14. There's a kick in it. It was 4-4 at half-time. There was literally a kick in it. And the Scholars have done a big job there to turn up. These are two London sides that aren't getting the credit that maybe they deserve at this stage, and this is off their own backs. It's not like they've been handed this kind of success. These have been built for themselves, and it's good to see, because if this can develop in the capital, then there's a much bigger room for expansion. So we're going to go to our off the field issue. This is one issue or two issues from the week that have been spoke about off the field and see what's going on. The big issue that I read about in Rugby League Weekly this week was the central funding and the issues with the central funding. Now, there's been a bit of a talk about whether we just end the funding for Championship and League One clubs and we invest that money into the Super League, essentially making the Super League a one-division professional outfit sort of thing, sort of like the NRL, but without the real impact to the reserve grade. If you want to be realistic, you're probably a bit more like the NFL, where they've just got a one-tier division and there's no way to come in or out of that. It's just franchise teams. And that, for me, is a big problem. I think people need to stop trying to make rugby league an individual sport, trying to make rugby league a commercial sport. It's not as much making it commercial as it is getting people interested in the game. I'm disgusted because the man that came up with this idea, or came up with sort of like the idea of passing it around the Super League teams, was Ian Lenigan. And I can see why Lenigan would do that, because in the interest of Wigan Warriors, it's the best thing to do. But for me, even as a Wigan fan, it disgusts me to think that we're going to just invest money in ourselves and not even attempt to help the rest of the game in this country. I think, just think about what that would do to League One sides. You've got teams like Newcastle who have really worked hard to get to where they are. And it doesn't seem like a lot when you're sat in Super League and they're only a semi-pro team. But in areas like that where they don't have rugby league as just even as interest, for them to push up into that division and really compete in that division and push to the top of the table in those divisions, it's really, really well worked. I mean, you've even got stories like Oldham, who got promoted, Rochdale, who did well in the Championship, are doing well in the Championship. They're making themselves known. Barrow are up there from last year after the big promotion. These are sides that don't really have the funding or the opportunity to succeed, but they're succeeding anyway. And we're gonna just go ahead and just go, nah, well, you can just look after yourselves now, because we want to focus on the Premier competition. It sounds absurd to me.
It sounds almost similar to something, I know it's not rugby league, but something that cricket's experiencing, in that it's failing to expand. It wants to expand, but it's not really taking responsibility for its own expansion. It's trying to make it more inclusive from what you're saying, that it's just exclusive, and just make it just for the big boys and the rest of you have just to fight out. And it just kind of goes against everything that's been put in place the last couple of years, wanting England to win a World Cup. They've now moved the base, haven't they, as well, the RFL to Manchester in a bid.
That's a massive move.
That's a step forward.
Yeah.
But then to take all the funding away from the smaller sides and give it back to the bigger teams in proportion would just seem a daft move. It would go completely against that better judgment of moving the training facilities and the headquarters in a bid to, make a more structured organisation.
I think we're in a period of time now where, because the RFL are having a lot of movement, especially at the top, there's a weakness to the structure of the game and the structure of funding, and some people are trying to take advantage of that for the best in their own interests, which just it annoys me. It annoys me because we've gone so far over the last 5 years, and there's still so much further to go, like reserve grades and extra funding, and it just seems like a massive step backwards for me. And so I can. They are only rumours at this point. There's nothing been decided, but I can only hope that this sort of thing doesn't happen for the future of the game, really. So our final section, as always, is the fans' focus. Something that we post out in the week, and we try and get you guys to give us a little feedback, and we speak about that a bit more. This week, we thought we'd go for a more generic topic, more than just a rugby league focused topic. It's something that's happening in sport that's a massive problem at the minute, and that's drugs, doping, whatever you want to call it, whether it's recreational or for the actual benefit of the sport. Our first comment comes from Michael Lofthouse, and he says recreational drugs should be discouraged, which is obvious, I think, but it shouldn't count as doping, because obviously there's not an advantage to the sport. And if clubs wish to make players unavailable, whilst they educate people on the substances, that's fine. I think that's a really good point to be made. I think it's very essential to rugby league, or in the best way, like home gate sports. I think my biggest example that I wanted to throw out there was from the Winter Olympics. I don't know if you watched any of the Winter Olympics. The Olympic athletes from Russia. So these athletes were the ones from Russia that had been extensively tested and had never had a problem. And then only halfway through the games do we find a doping problem. In curling, of all things, curling. Like, what can you possibly take that makes you a better curler? I was watching the BBC
What makes you a better sweeper?
Exactly. I was watching the BBC coverage of this, and I couldn't believe what I was listening to. And they were just saying, like, it slows the heart rate down, and they said they could see, like, in key stones that are being thrown and key areas of the match that can get you 2 or 3 or win you the game, it could be better to have a slower heart rate. But surely, of all things, and I love curling, I'm not trying to take a dig at it, but it shouldn't need that much change for you to be able to throw a good stone or a bad stone. I think you're either a good curler or you're not a good curler, in my opinion. And I just thought it was absolutely ridiculous. And so it's not something that's happening in rugby league. I mean, you've got the Bradley Wiggins case, which is obviously not confirmed in any stretch of the imagination. Personally, I don't think he did do anything wrong, but obviously that's ongoing. But again, that's another cycling issue, and that's happened, 5-6 times over the last 3 years. And I think we need to count ourselves lucky in some way that most of our problems come from recreational drugs and not drugs that are there to enhance performance. There's nobody going out of the way to cheat as much as in other sports, should we say. But as I said, like, this idea of maybe recreational drugs not being counted as doping, I think that would create a problem for our sport, personally. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, the recreational drugs aren't doping, but in the same time, you shouldn't do them anyway. I think that's common knowledge and common sense, really. But I think if you set out to do that, then players might lose their responsibility. I don't know how much of a problem it is within the inner circles, and if anything, you got to be careful talking about stuff like this and how much of it goes on. But if you were to say, if you got caught taking X, Y, and Z, it's not doping, what's to say it's not just as... That's almost making it legal, isn't it? It's
I
just
think
making it on the same level as alcohol.
my biggest concern when arguments like this comes up is people always say these guys are role models, and that's true. But I don't think that what they do in their personal time or in the off-season, for example, should really have an effect on the way that we see them, as long as obviously it doesn't get highly reported, because obviously at that point it becomes a problem. But I think in the case of Zach Herdacre, it was found in his system during a game, well, it was post the game, but it must have been in his system during the game, which is then a problem, because at that moment in time he is a role model, he is a key figure for a lot of kids watching the Castleford Tigers at that point. That's where my biggest problem lies with cases like this.
I think in that case, Rugby League's fortunate almost in the lack of coverage it receives. You could argue that Hardacre's he's obviously left now, but he's almost gone under. It's not gone under the radar, but it's not been as widely reported as athletics, cycling, anything that would have happened in football.
Yeah, I think when the Zach Herdacre case first came out, I think I posted the article on our website, and it was the highest viewed page because it was Zach Herdacre. But still, comparing that to some of the pages that get seen for cycling, football, it's nowhere near the numbers that you'd expect. So you could say that. John Atkinson reckons that life bans should be given out for people that take recreational drugs or caught positive in any form, and he doesn't really have any sympathy for people caught. I think another issue that you have to bring forward is that some of these players are in environments that, not the club environment, just environments at home and with friends that put them in awkward positions.
Jeopardise their careers, some of them, don't they?
And it's not due to the sort of attitude, it's due just to lack of awareness and lack of support for some people. And so I do feel like at some point we have to look at the athletes themselves and say, is this person getting enough support? I know there's been a lot spoke about depression after Rugby League. There's a lot of people coming out and talking about it. And I feel like that's key. And if we can get in front of this problem before it starts, we can make the game a lot more accessible. And I think that's... So I'm sort of on a flip, me. I think that... I do think that drugs should be banned, and I do think people should get banned for them, but I feel like people that are caught using drugs should have some support system in place, professional support system in place to help those people get through what is clearly a troublesome time in their life, especially if it's recreational drugs. Yeah,
there should be a really rehabilitation process in the works to kind of help people through it, because you've already said depression is a massive thing. That's across all sports. I think that's well documented. And alcohol's another one which has kind of been widely accepted as an issue now. And maybe it's time that we push the drugs issue as a problem that needs to be looked at held in the same regard, because it obviously is a massive issue. It's just not being spoken about as much because the high-profile cases involving drink invariably involve drink driving, lead to killing people, and that's sort of why that gets more recognition. I perhaps think, and maybe it is time that drugs were held in the same regard as alcohol and depression, and maybe it just needs a big effort from a support group, like you say, to help those people through the times.
Okay, and thank you for all your comments, and on behalf of myself and Dan, I want to thank you for listening to the podcast, and tune in next time.